The restaurant fell silent the moment I saw her standing alone beside the entrance, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly and the other gripping the strap of a worn handbag. She looked terrified, embarrassed, and completely out of place beneath the expensive chandelier. Then I noticed the 4 people sitting at my reserved table, trying desperately not to laugh. That was when I understood. The woman wasn't my date. She was the joke. If you've ever believed that kindness and second chances can change someone's life, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more stories about second chances and unexpected acts of humanity. My name is Daniel, and for the past 3 years, dating had been the last thing on my mind. After losing my wife in a sudden accident, I had spent years rebuilding my life piece by piece. I wasn't bitter, but I had become careful. My little daughter, Emma, was my entire world, and I had promised myself that I would never bring someone into her life unless I truly trusted them. My friends knew this, which was why I should have realized something was wrong when they insisted on arranging a double date for me. They said it would be casual, just dinner, good food, and a chance to meet someone new. I reluctantly agreed because, after years of shutting people out, a small part of me wondered whether I was finally ready to let someone into my life again. When I arrived at the restaurant, my friends were already seated. They exchanged strange glances as I approached, but I didn't think much of it. Then the hostess walked toward me and quietly asked whether I was expecting another guest. Before I could answer, the pregnant woman entered. She was probably in her early 30s, wearing a simple blue dress and a faded gray cardigan. Her shoes were practical, her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and there was something exhausted in her eyes that no expensive restaurant could hide. She stopped when she saw my friends. One of them covered his mouth to hide a laugh. I looked at her, then at them, and suddenly everything made sense. They had invited her because they thought it would be hilarious to watch my reaction. They knew I was cautious about dating. They knew I wanted a fresh start. So they had apparently decided that putting a heavily pregnant stranger across from me would create the funniest double date story they could tell later. For several seconds, nobody moved. I could feel the woman's humiliation spreading across the room. She lowered her eyes as if she wanted the floor to open beneath her. Then she quietly apologized and turned toward the door. She didn't deserve to be there. She didn't deserve to be laughed at. And whatever mistakes had brought her to that moment, she certainly didn't deserve to have her dignity turned into entertainment. I stepped forward and stopped her before she could leave. I didn't ask about the pregnancy. I didn't ask who the father was. I simply told her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was welcome to stay. My friend's smiles disappeared. I pulled out the chair beside mine and asked if she would like to have dinner with me. She stared at me as though she couldn't understand why I wasn't angry with her. She finally sat down. Her name was Claire. At first, she barely touched her food. She kept apologizing for the situation, even though she had done absolutely nothing to cause it. Slowly, I learned that she had been told she was meeting a man who was genuinely interested in getting to know her. Someone had apparently given her the restaurant address and assured her that the evening was a legitimate blind date. She had spent nearly an hour getting ready, not because she expected romance, but because she wanted to feel normal again. That sentence stayed with me. She explained that her husband had left months earlier after discovering she was pregnant. He had disappeared without offering an explanation or even saying goodbye. Since then, Claire had been working 2 jobs while trying to find affordable housing. She wasn't looking for someone to rescue her. She wasn't even looking for a relationship that night. She simply wanted one evening where she wasn't treated like a problem. Across the table, my friends had gone completely quiet. One finally admitted that the whole thing had started as a prank. They thought I would make an awkward excuse, leave the restaurant, and give them something to laugh about. Instead, I looked at them and told them I wasn't angry because they had embarrassed me. I was angry because they had used another human being's pain as entertainment. That was the moment everything changed. I left the restaurant with Claire after dinner, not because we had suddenly fallen in love, but because I didn't want her walking home alone after what had happened. She thanked me repeatedly, and I kept telling her she didn't owe me anything. Before we separated, she mentioned that she was struggling to pay the deposit for a small apartment. I offered to help, but she immediately refused. Pride was the only thing she felt she still had control over. A week later, I saw her again. She was standing outside a small grocery store, holding a paper bag in one hand and looking at her phone with tears in her eyes. Her landlord had increased the deposit, and the apartment she had hoped to rent was no longer affordable. I remembered what she had told me that night and decided to help in a different way. Instead of giving her money, I offered her a position at my office. She had years of experience managing accounts and scheduling, but after her pregnancy became difficult, she had lost her previous job. She accepted. Over the next few months, Claire slowly became part of our lives. Not romantically at first. She became Emma's favorite person to talk to about books. She helped me organize my chaotic office. She laughed at my terrible coffee-making skills. And somehow, without either of us noticing exactly when it happened, my home began to feel warmer. Then came the night everything nearly fell apart. Claire went into early labor. I was working late when I received the call. She was at the hospital, frightened and alone. I drove there as fast as I safely could. When I reached her room, she was holding back tears, terrified that something might happen to her baby. I sat beside her and reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. Hours later, a tiny baby girl was born. Claire cried when she heard that first little cry. I cried too. But the story wasn't over. The baby's father suddenly returned 2 weeks later, demanding that Claire let him see the child. He claimed he had changed, but Claire was terrified. She had spent months rebuilding her life without him. Now he wanted to walk back into it as though nothing had happened. She asked me what she should do. For once, I didn't give her an answer. I told her that the decision belonged to her. I would support whatever choice protected her and her child. That was when Claire finally understood something important. I had never stayed because I felt sorry for her. I stayed because I respected her. Months passed. One rainy evening, Claire and I sat on the porch while Emma played inside with the baby. Claire looked at me and admitted that the cruel joke at the restaurant had unexpectedly become the beginning of the safest chapter of her life. I smiled and told her that sometimes life gives us the strangest beginnings. Then she reached for my hand. There was no dramatic proposal. No perfect restaurant. No carefully planned speech. Just two people who had both been hurt, sitting beneath a gray sky, realizing that neither of them had to face the future alone. A year later, I married Claire in a small garden ceremony. Emma carried the flowers, and Claire's daughter slept peacefully in her grandmother's arms. Some of the friends who had planned that terrible double-date joke were there too. They had apologized long before the wedding, and I had forgiven them, not because what they did was acceptable, but because I had learned that forgiveness could sometimes be another form of healing. As I watched Claire walk toward me that afternoon, I remembered the frightened woman standing beneath the restaurant chandelier, believing everyone in the room was laughing at her. They had intended to make her feel worthless. Instead, she became family. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all: you never know what someone is carrying when they walk through a door. You don't know how many times they've been rejected, abandoned, judged, or made to feel like a burden. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do isn't to solve their problems. Sometimes it's simply to sit beside them and remind them that they still matter. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a reminder that compassion still exists. And before the story ends, I want you to leave one special comment: kindness can change everything. Because sometimes the person everyone else chooses to laugh at is the person who deserves someone to stand beside them the most. And sometimes, what begins as a cruel joke can become an unexpected second chance, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because one person chooses compassion when everyone else chooses cruelty.